Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Underground. This is the Intel update for December 22nd through the 28th, 2024. I know that it's been quite a busy week over the Christmas holiday, so I'm afraid I won't be able to cover everything that's happened over the past week or so. However, I did, like in typical fashion, want to cover some of the highlights and some of the more significant events that may start to be a little bit more problematic or indications and warnings for how the new year might go. So, unfortunately, in classic fashion this time of year, and just due to everyone being kind of busy and not a lot of details coming out about most of these things, it's going to be a lot of speculation today. However, hopefully, we can kind of muddle our way through some of this stuff and see what lessons we can maybe learn that may apply and help us out a little bit more next year. So, let's get right to it. Starting off with the Northeast region, I briefly wanted to mention some of the incidents that have occurred in New York, namely those involving arson attacks. So I've been rather hesitant to mention a lot of the arson attacks that have occurred in New York City because, well, for one, there's not really a whole lot you can do regarding these incidents after the fact. And I don't know if data supports this or not. However, it does seem like the potential for copycat attacks is much higher than the lessons that we can learn from kind of dwelling on some of these incidents. However, since it's kind of become more mainstream, the risks of people being set on fire on public transit in New York City are quite elevated. So most people have probably saw the rather graphic and horrific incident of a woman who was murdered on the subway in this fashion back on December 22nd. Not going to go into many details on that one because it's just not something that is very appropriate, I think, to kind of go into the details of. However, the victim remains unidentified. So this is something of note because after this incident occurred, there were many reports showing the victim's picture and name, and in fact, this was a scam. The victim of this December 22nd attack has not been identified yet. The NYPD is actually still trying to use DNA to figure out who it was. So that's a huge concern, simply because after this incident occurred, basically a lot of AI generated crypto scams popped out that were trying to capitalize on the victim of a horrific crime. So there's that to be mindful of. Also, on the 27th, so yesterday, there was another person who was set on fire in Penn Station. Again, with this one, there are not a lot of details. As far as I know, there hasn't been any graphical video evidence of this. However, this did show up on a lot of police blotters and things like that, so it did occur. I don't know any more details than that. When it comes to these sorts of things, it could be a wide variety of things, but again, it's just another reminder to be very careful in public transit no matter where you're at, really. Moving down to New Jersey, rather than talk about anything new with regards to the drone reports that we kind of got fascinated with a couple of weeks ago, I did want to mention one data point that we use in the Intel world a lot, which is the absence of information. Right up front, there haven't really been any new reports from the New Jersey area. There have been a lot of fakes, and a lot of people who have recorded themselves committing hoaxes, for instance, filling clear helium balloons with flashing lights and letting them go. So there have been a lot of these types of events take place in New Jersey, but again, nothing really super clear. Unfortunately, most of these fake reports or manipulated videos or Photoshop or whatever, they're tainting the legitimate evidence. Again, I think it's really unfortunate because it discourages people from reporting things, and that's not what we want to do. We want to encourage people to say something if they see something, right? The issue comes from a lot of people really not having a forensic mindset when it comes to evidence, right? So again, I know that I have dedicated a lot of time to this that hasn't really been helpful. However, I think that before I can start to answer thousands and thousands of DMs and messages and emails, I really need to sit down and explain what good reporting is. So that's my fault that I haven't done that so much. I've talked about sourcing. I've talked a little bit about different analytical techniques, but it's clearly not enough, right? So I feel kind of bad by saying to someone who comes to me with like what they think is a genuine report, and it's just not it's not really what I would consider definitive in any way. A lot of people come to me with, oh, well, this is confirmed. Well, what does that word mean to you? Because as far as I'm concerned, it's really hard that's a really hard thing to do. Confirmed by whom? Confirmed to what degree? When you say confirmed, what do you mean? Because we have to be very, very methodical in our thinking process with these things, and unfortunately, I'm just not seeing that. The issue is that it takes many, many, many hours of education and walking through some ideas before someone can understand what is helpful and what is not helpful. So it takes training, it takes knowledge, it takes understanding, and it takes practice. And unfortunately, I can't convey that to everyone who sends me a message saying, "Well, look, this is a confirmed UFO" or something. You know what I mean? It's really hard to kind of come back and write paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs explaining that the particular piece of evidence that somebody sent me does not indicate what they say it indicates, right? I can't break this down. I just don't have the time for every little piece that I get. So, yeah, really all I have to work with is what the authorities have said or done, which is, in this case, they've put up a lot of NOTAMs and a lot of TFRs, no-fly zones, over critical infrastructure in New York City and New Jersey, Long Island, places like that. So, that's more concerning to me because it appears that now that this has gone into fruition and we've seen how this develops and these no-fly zones have they're still there, no one seems to really have questioned whether or not this was a good idea. So again, like I said last week, it's going to be probably not very good in the long run, but again, this is something that is probably going to be very much debated. Similar debates will be undertaken in Northern Europe, where we have yet another alleged cable cutting incident in the Baltic Sea. In this case, it's technically in the Gulf of Finland, but this was the cable, power cable, an electrical power cable, Estlink 2, that spans the Gulf of Finland between Finland and Estonia. As one might expect, Finnish authorities are kind of taking the lead on this sort of thing with regards to investigating the vessels that they think may have deliberately drug anchor over the cable itself. Right now, the lead suspect is the merchant vessel Eagle S, which is, again, the media has kind of gotten a hold of this and they're starting to call it Russia's shadow fleet. Basically, a lot of Russia-affiliated spy ships or spy vessels, or really dual use. Essentially, the general idea or the general theory, how true this is remains debatable, but the general theory is that Russia has, as part of their official naval doctrine, has more or less recruited certain cargo ships, tanker vessels, things like that, so that they can help Russia in some ways. For instance, a crew during 99% of their voyage may just be doing their normal merchant vessel thing, transiting cargo all around the world, but while they're over here in this particular area, well, let's drop anchor for a couple hours and see if we can drag it over a cable. And then they go back to being a normal merchant or tanker vessel, right? So that's kind of the general gist of how this works out. How true this is, personally, I think it's probably quite true. This is kind of a well-known thing that's been done by Russia for a long period of time in terms of at least intelligence collection. Now, where the debate comes in is, have they transitioned from using merchant vessels as intelligence collection ships? Have they transitioned from that into operations? I don't know, hard to say, but it certainly looks like it, considering that we've got a lot of Russian-affiliated ships that are, kind of bobbing out there in the Baltic Sea, and they just so happen to cut a lot of cables. So we went from an era of virtually no one dragging anchor over a cable that's actually like far from shore. Anchor dragging incidents, cutting cables happens quite a lot near places where cables are landed. So over the past couple of decades that these cables have been strung up all around the world, this has been taken into account. So we went from an era where this happened a lot to an era where this didn't really happen that much, and now it seems like a lot of cables are having anchors drug over them in really random and weird places where a ship should not be dragging anchor. So I think we all can kind of see how this is going on here, but again, it's mostly speculation as to what's going on because, well, investigations are ongoing. I should also note that the Finnish authorities who have seized the Eagle S, they have alleged that on board that vessel was a significant intelligence collection suite of sensors. What they exactly were supposed to do with those sensors, no one has stated with any sort of confidence level yet. This does jive with what Russia is known to do, and other nations around the world as well, particularly China is known to do. However, again, it's just one of those things where it's he said, she said. We don't really have a whole lot of evidence so far, so we're going to have to kind of wait and see on that. But the bottom line for the Baltic Sea region is expect more of the same. Expect more cable cuttings to continue, and also expect an increased NATO presence. So, again, this is entering into a time of heightened risk throughout the Baltic Sea region. Now that we've covered some of the concerns in the Baltic Sea, let's shift over to the Caspian Sea region and discuss the downing, potential shoot down of Azerbaijan Airlines Flight 8243. Now, undoubtedly, many of you have already heard and followed the events that have occurred following this incident. However, I did want to talk about it at some length because the implications of this potential shoot down incident are very wide and very wide ranging. So, what do we know? At 07:55 on December 25th, Christmas Day, Azerbaijan Airlines Flight 8243 departed from Baku bound for Grozny in Chechnya. It was a short regional flight that had occurred many, many times, so it was fairly standard as far as aircraft operations go. Once they got to Grozny, however, the crew reported extremely thick fog in conjunction with navigational issues. So for those who maybe are not familiar with the electronic interference to commercial aircraft throughout southern and western Europe, Russia has been jamming a substantial part of the electromagnetic spectrum, along with some limited GPS spoofing here and there, but it's mostly been jamming. This is largely to prevent Ukrainian drones from using GPS guidance to fly to targets in Russia. If the Russians jam the GPS satellites, which are fairly easy to do, then the drone can't receive the GPS signal from the satellite and therefore can't make it to its target. That's the general idea. Well, the problem is that this jams a lot. It doesn't just jam drones, but it jams commercial aircraft as well. So for the past 2 or 3 years, ever since the war kind of escalated, I should say, a lot of commercial pilots throughout Europe have reported having GPS issues, right? So that's a huge problem. And so on Christmas morning in Grozny, it appeared that the GPS jamming was quite significant because unknown to Flight 8243, the Russian Air Defense Artillery, or ADA, assets in Grozny had just intercepted a few Ukrainian drones that morning, allegedly. They had shot a few down, right? Some substantial drones that were inbound to the city of Grozny, right? So they had their GPS jammers turned on. They had a lot of electronic countermeasures out, a lot of electronic warfare devices, right? So this aircraft was just in the wrong place at the wrong time in terms of the electronic warfare affecting the aircraft quite significantly. So if we were to put ourselves in the shoes of the pilots on board this aircraft, you've got extremely thick fog. You've already tried to land at this airport twice, and it just wasn't happening. They weren't able to do it. They had to go around twice because they just simply had very poor visibility, and their instruments were acting up due to the electronic warfare. So the stage is set for something very, very bad to happen, right? We're already operating under a compromised state. Well, at least according to some passengers, again, eyewitness statements vary, but according to some of the passengers who survived the incident, on the third pass over Grozny, on the third landing attempt, something catastrophic occurred. The pilots via radio reported that it was a bird strike. They hit a bird as they were coming into land in Grozny for the third time. Passengers, however, in the back stated that they actually got hit by a missile. So they heard an explosion and shrapnel essentially peppered through the rear of the aircraft and injured a few people. Now, at this time, it was really unknown as to what had occurred. Again, civilian pilots, they're not going to be, training for getting shot down by a missile, right? So when they hear an explosion or some sort of catastrophic event on the aircraft, they're going to think that it's probably a bird strike because that's what they're trained to understand that a potential explosion is. In any case, there does not appear to be any problem with the engines per se, but there does appear to be a substantial loss of hydraulics throughout the aircraft. So So after this initial incident occurs over Grozny, whatever it was, either if it was a bird strike genuinely or actually a missile strike that wasn't a total catastrophic missile strike, maybe it was a defective missile or something, or maybe radar guided, I'm not entirely certain. Again, lots of speculation here. Either way, after that catastrophic incident occurred in Grozny, they started heading east, directly away from what at the time was probably bad weather. Again, we don't really know why they were heading east. They were trying to get away from bad weather. Some initial reports say they tried to land in Russia, in Dagestan, at an airport there. However, they were either denied or the weather was bad. Again, statements vary. Either way, what ended up happening is they flew about 300 miles to the east over the Caspian Sea and barely limped in over to the airport at Aktau, which is mostly a mining town, but it's got a large international airport there that can handle landing aircraft in pretty much any weather. So in any case, they were able to declare an emergency over the Caspian Sea as they were inbound to Aktau and eventually limp into the city and crash land just outside the airport as they were trying to line up on it. They made a couple of passes over the airport, and it looks like they weren't able to really properly line up on the runway, and they just kind of had to land pretty much anywhere they could. So they did the best job they possibly could, considering the catastrophic damage to the aircraft via whatever it was. Roughly half the crew or passengers survived. Both pilots unfortunately died in the crash, along with one flight attendant, so we don't have the benefit of their testimony. Unfortunately, we're just going to have to go on the statements of the survivors and the flight data recorder, of course. But as we can see based on these images here, it was a fairly kinetic crash, and it honestly is truly a Christmas miracle that anyone survived this crash. In any case, I wanted to cover the leading theories, not necessarily because I'm personally interested in things like disaster preparedness and aircraft incidents and things like this, but because this has very, very wide geopolitical implications depending on what actually happened. So in terms of the theories that have popped up following this incident, let me run through the top 4 or 5 and just lay these out regarding what may have possibly happened. So the first theory is that the aircraft struck a bird over Grozny. There was never any sort of missile that hit the aircraft, and that all of this was a pure accident. That is one of the most sort of innocent theories so far. Another theory is that the aircraft did strike a bird, which caused very strange behavior over the city of Grozny, multiple go-arounds at the airport, flying at non-standard altitudes, at non-standard speeds, varying speed and altitude quite a bit over Grozny, which attracted the attention of Russian air defense artillery, who shot at the aircraft thinking that it was a drone or some kind of retrofit aircraft that was being used as a weapon, right? A third theory is that there was no bird strike at all. There was no odd behavior. Everything was totally normal, except for the weather, and the multiple go-arounds at Grozny. Everything was totally normal, but this was a purely accidental shoot down by Russian forces that they completely messed up, and it's all on the Russians, right? Another theory, similar to the second theory, is that there was no bird strike, but the odd behavior caused due to the weather. In the context of the recent drone attacks, the Russians deliberately engaged the aircraft due to, again, the current threats that are posed to the Russian Federation by, again, some commercial civilian aircraft, right? And the final major theory is that there was no bird strike, there was no odd behavior at all, and the aircraft wasn't even targeted deliberately by the Russians. The aircraft was really just very, very unlucky and accidentally caught a missile that was actually fired at a different target, say a drone. All 5 of these major theories really have a lot of truth to them, but all 5 of these major theories also have a few details. There are a few details that have come out that kind of go against some of these theories, but again, we'll probably get to that in due time. But again, let's focus on some of the potential motives right now, and as of right now, where again there's not that much information that's been made public, the investigation is still ongoing. The motives are very, very wide-ranging, and this is where things can get very, very kinetic in other ways. So, generally speaking, the Russian kind of attitude towards this is accident. Vladimir Putin released a statement expressing condolences and sent an aircraft of medical aid and things like that to help out the victims and stuff like that. The airline themselves have already started the process of financial compensation for the survivors and for the victims, the families of the victims. So this is being processed right now as an accident and not like a more deliberate act, even though it may have been. So again, this is being treated by most of the parties involved as an accident. So again, much like the situation in the Baltic Sea, the situation is very, very dangerous in terms of the international relations and international impact. And here's why. One of the main considerations here for what may have happened is where the actual incident took place. So if we are going to assume for a moment that this was indeed a SAM strike, a surface-to-air missile strike on a commercial aircraft, let's assume for a moment that that's what happened. The location and timing of such is going to be very, very, very important for international events, essentially. This is because even though the main theory right now is that Russia accidentally shot this aircraft down, the potential remains for this not to have been caused by Russia. So, for instance, if a malign actor, say a terrorist group, which are known to operate within Chechnya, where the exact incident allegedly occurred, if they were able to get their hands on a MANPAD, a man portable air defense system, which is extremely common throughout Chechnya, and as we remember, what just happened in Syria. Syria collapsed, right? And the thousands of MANPAD systems that were being held by the Assad regime are now spread out throughout arms dealers all throughout Eastern Europe, probably to include Chechnya. Plus, if we remember all of those reports a few months ago, of the MANPAD threat, MANPAD's the proliferation of these shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles is extremely high now. So we're operating with that assumption in mind, and we also have to remember that when it comes to targeting commercial aircraft with a potential MANPAD, these shoulder-fired SAMs that you see, these shoulder-fired missiles, they don't have that good of a range. So the best chance that you're going to get to shoot down a commercial aircraft if you're a terrorist is when the aircraft's taking off or landing. This is very well known throughout pretty much every insurgent group on the planet. So, where did this event occur? If it occurred over Grozny, it could just as easily be an insurgent as Russia. Right? It could just as easily be a guy in the back of a pickup truck with a MANPAD, shoot and scoot, he's gone, and Russia gets blamed for it. Likewise, it could equally be Russia. Russia has a lot of air defense artillery throughout the region. They could fire a missile, shoot and scoot, move around, and no one would ever know it's them. Even forensically, it will be challenging because guess what? Russian munitions, the explosives, the explosive residue that's going to be found on shrapnel inside this aircraft, it's going to point to exactly what kind of munition it is. But that doesn't really help investigators, does it? Because Russia has proliferated their arms all over the planet. So unless it's from like a Stinger missile or something that was American made, it's going to be really hard to narrow it down. It could be from an insurgent, it could be from Russia, it could be anyone. All things considered, it probably was Russia, but we also have to entertain the possibility that somebody is trying to cause a little bit of misdirection here. The potential is there. Now, the reason that I wanted to highlight where and when this aircraft was shot down is because this matters a lot in terms of who might have done it. For instance, if the aircraft was shot down as it was trying to land in Grozny, well, it could have been an insurgent with a MANPAD, or it could have been Russia. However, if it was shot down over the Caspian Sea, it was most certainly Russia. I highly doubt that an insurgent is going to be out there in the middle of the Caspian Sea in a rowboat trying to shoot a MANPAD at an aircraft that's probably already 2 or 3 times the range of the MANPAD in the first place, right? It just doesn't make any sense. So if this aircraft was hit by a missile, and if it was hit over Grozny, this is going to be a very, very important distinction in terms of who did it. Now, the reason that I'm inclined to think that Russia did it is because if it was a MANPAD launch, Russia would instantly know that none of their people fired on the aircraft, and they would be livid. You would see the FSB hopping right now all over southern Chechnya, and it would be bad. You would see a very substantial counterterrorism effort being underway in the event that it was an insurgent. In short, if Russia did it, then you'd see probably exactly what you're seeing now. Condolences and flowers being sent, but largely nothing more than that. If Russia did not do it, then they have to account for a missile launch inside their nation state, and that would be something they're not going to just let go, right? So if it was Russia, you'd see what we're seeing now. If it was not Russia, if it was an insurgent that had snuck into Chechnya with a manpad and shot a plane down, right? If that's the case, you would probably see more from Russia than what we're seeing now, which is, again, why the Russia did it theory probably holds the most amount of weight. It's exceptionally unheard of, just to make this note, it's exceptionally unheard of for any aircraft to fly very far after being hit with a missile. This just doesn't happen that often. However, there are some situations where this could occur. Once again, a lot of the technical details that are kind of needed to make this assessment of what actually happened here, we just don't know yet. Just to get these details kind of out there, these random thoughts, just the technical details of whatever missile was fired at this aircraft are very, very important as far as the investigation goes, because most people are familiar with surface-to-air missiles being heat-seeking, right? Infrared guided missiles that are attracted to the heat signature of an aircraft's engines, right? Well, on civilian aircraft, where are the engines located? Well, they're located on the wing. And where's all the fuel located, or most of the fuel located for a commercial airliner? Inside the wing, which is why, generally speaking, whenever we see manpads that are, again, of a variant of missile that is an infrared guided missile, generally speaking, there are no survivors from these sorts of things, because the missile hits the engine, explodes the wing, rips the wing off, and nobody makes it home that night, right? This is unfortunate, but this is generally how it goes. The fact that most of the damage to the aircraft appeared to be located in the tail suggests that it could have been a different variant of missile than we normally see. Again, this is very speculative, but it could have been anything from radar guided to more of like a semi-active missile. It's hard to say. It could also have been a defective missile. It could have been defective and detonated before it got to its target. I'm absolutely no expert in surface-to-air missiles or Sapphires or anything like that, but these are things that the investigators are going to have to know. More broadly, though, it does highlight the risks and the fact that all of these conflicts around the Earth are now becoming more elevated in terms of risk. Like I wrote in the Wire yesterday, there are a lot of concerns now. There are a lot of regions in the planet where you want to make sure that your plane probably doesn't fly through that region. And unfortunately, we're starting to see these bubbles where commercial aviation are refusing to fly through. These bubbles are getting bigger. The bubble over the Middle East is getting bigger because of the conflict between, Israel, Lebanon, Syria kind of thing, but now also including Yemen. And basically, an incident we're going to talk about here in a minute. Now, the Red Sea, a major aviation corridor, is host to some risks too. So, in terms of commercial aviation and risks to aviation, I feel like it always must be noted that the risks that commercial aviation has exhibited over the years are generally minimal. People love to bring up the statistic that it's very much safer to fly anywhere than it is to drive anywhere. The problem is that when you plug that into a risk management matrix, it's still a different decision-making process. So, for instance, just to run through this really quickly, the chances of something happening to you when you're driving your car are, maybe low to moderate, but definitely, not zero, right? However, when something does happen, or if something does happen, it's very unlikely to result in the deaths of 300 plus people, right? So the impact, right, the outcome of that is not going to be absolutely catastrophic, generally speaking. Now, you can absolutely get killed in a car accident. That happens every single day. But in terms of hundreds and hundreds of people being killed in a single incident is very, very rare when it comes to vehicles. Likewise, on the other side of the aisle, the likelihood of something happening to an aircraft, a commercial aircraft, is very low, astronomically low. But when it does happen, it's usually catastrophic, right? So it's a completely different thought process, and I think that they're at completely different corners of the risk management matrix in terms of risk assessment, right? Likewise, with jumping over to the Red Sea region, same thing, same mentality. Many of you have heard of the recent USS Gettysburg friendly fire incident, in which the USS Gettysburg, as part of the USS Harry S. Truman Carrier Strike Group, fired 2 missiles at 2 F-18s that were trying to land on the Truman. Again, very few details regarding this incident or these 2 incidents. They occurred at roughly the same amount of time. However, the general story is very, very simple. The first aircraft was lining up to land, got hit with a missile just completely out of the blue. The second aircraft in the stack to land on the Truman saw the fireball, and they were able to actually see the second missile being fired at them, and they were able to evade. However, the first aircraft, the one which was actually shot down, the pilot and the weapons officer were able to eject successfully. One of them was injured, though. However, again, we just don't have hardly any details on this at this time. The second aircraft was actually able to observe the whole incident right in front of them as it was happening literally right off their nose as the aircraft in front of them was trying to land, and they were able to take evasive action and very, very narrowly miss being hit. So, again, this is not something that happens often. Like I wrote in The Wire, the last time the U.S. Navy shot down one of their own planes was in 1968, back when the concepts of identification friend or foe, IFF systems, were kind of certainly not what they are today, right? So this is not one of those oops kind of moments. This is a very, very, very serious implication, right? If the U.S. Navy cannot get their act together to run their own IFF systems and to not shoot down their own military aircraft, which have systems on board, multiple systems on board, to make sure this can't happen, right? If the impossible happens with the U.S. Navy's own military aircraft, then what do you think the chances are of the U.S. Navy shooting down a commercial aircraft, right? Shooting down one of their own F-18s is bad enough, right? But shooting down a commercial aircraft which does not have IFF, which does not have any of this stuff, in one of the most heavily trafficked air corridors in the world, up and down the Red Sea, right? Before at least before the Houthis started firing missiles. Granted, aircraft have now started kind of avoiding the area, but still, the potential risk there to commercial aviation is extreme. So now we have to be slightly concerned about the Russians shooting down their own aircraft in southern Russia. We have to worry about the U.S. Navy shooting down their own aircraft or commercial aircraft in the Red Sea region. All in all, not good. So I don't want to dwell on it too much, but I did want to mention these incidents because there's not a whole lot that the average person can do other than stay aware, right? Be aware. And I know that it's tiring. I know that it's boring. I know that it's not cool a lot of times. And I know that you get a lot of funny looks from people sometimes by, being a little bit, just the tiniest bit more vigilant than the average bear, being the tiniest bit more observant and careful. You tend to get some funny looks sometimes, but I think that in terms of what we're seeing around the world, the slightest action, right, the slightest bit of care, the slightest bit of discernment, caution, and the slightest bit of critical thinking could have saved a lot of lives over the past few years. You may get a lot of funny looks, you may get a lot of eye rolling, you may get a lot of people calling you some not nice names, but being careful and having a little bit more discernment to make decisions and clear up communications issues before they become an issue, right? Just clarifying things is very, very, very helpful. So again, that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about today. Hopefully this wasn't too far off topic. I'm sorry I haven't been able to be too articulate over the holidays, so hopefully this new year I'll be able to be a little bit better in that regard. But for now, let's talk about the intercepted GhostNet reports for this week. Again, quite a busy week. A lot of people sending messages back and forth in terms of testing and holiday wishes. That's all fantastic to see. A lot of people building their own antennas and things like that, and a lot of messages that are coming out in terms of news reports and things like that, which is always really, really good to see. And just as a reminder, so that I don't forget myself, I am still working on the GhostNet. I'm trying to improve things, make this radio network a little bit better, make it a little bit more streamlined, to make it a lot more palatable for the people coming into this who know nothing about radio, right? A lot of the radio guys out there who have radios and use radios more routinely, even for a lot of these guys, it's pretty complicated and pretty hard to do. Now I've tried to make it as easy as I possibly can, but there's always room for improvement, right? So I'm going to be improving the GhostNet quite a bit with lessons learned and things like that over the next, foreseeable future, right? For now, though, the GhostNet's going to stay as it is in terms of, again, the basics of it. And what I'm working on now is more along the lines of a supplement. something that's separate from the GhostNet plan, but you can use as well to help kind of round things out. Again, radio is not the only way and the only consideration for communications. Radio is just one of the tools in the toolbox. So we need many more tools, right? So you can't just complete any project with just one tool, right? You need a lot more. So I'm still working on that in terms of some of the more contingency-based communications that we may need. So stay tuned for that. I have no ETA on it. I hope that I'll be able to get it done within the next few months, to be honest. But again, everything takes longer than you think it does sometimes. So hopefully that has been very helpful, and I look forward to see what the GhostNet and all these other projects I've got going come to fruition in the next year. So that's really all I have for today. Here are the sources, of course, and I hope this has been somewhat helpful in terms of really kind of getting us off on the right foot when it comes to the new year coming around. The next report will be next year, right? So hopefully we can start the year off with some good resolutions, some good dedicated goals that we can spend a lot of time working on. And I really hope that we can make 2025 a good year. So, again, thank you guys all for watching. Thank you all for all of your support over the years. I could not do any of this without your support. So, thank you all for that. I really do mean it. And I hope that a lot of this work can be useful for some of you out there who might find it interesting. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have for today. Thank you guys all again for watching, and we will see you next time. And as always, fight in the shade.